Late last year, concerns about China's military capabilities arose after many reported that the country tested a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile. Missile experts expressed worry about China's new missile with nuclear capability. There's a new report indicating China could soon be able to deploy nuclear-tipped missiles that U.S. defenses would find much harder to detect. U.S. officials closely monitored China's missile program following a report of a possible ominous missile test. Was it true? What did China have to say about itself? Can China get a leg up on the US with this new weapon? It began with what appeared to be a missing rocket. In July, the China Academy of Launch Vehicle Technology announced the 77th launch of one of its Long March 2C rockets. In late August, it announced the 79th. What happened to launch number 78? According to an article in the Financial Times, citing unnamed sources, it was used for a secret test of a powerful new kind of hypersonic missile. Jeffrey Lewis, a professor at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, explained the mechanics of the new weapons. Thus, the simplest way to imagine this new weapon system is to imagine the space shuttle, put a nuclear weapon in the cargo bay, and then don't bother with the landing gear. This hypersonic weapon launches briefly into orbit, and it glides back to Earth just like the space shuttle, except for when it gets to where it's going, and then it goes boom. A bit dramatic, but it effectively explains what US intelligence noticed about this new super-secret rocket weapon China has up its sleeve. According to the report, the missile circled the Earth before accelerating towards its target, demonstrating an advanced capability in space that caught US intelligence off guard. The test showed that China had made astounding progress on hypersonic weapons and was far more advanced than US officials realized, the report read. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin declined to comment on this when addressing the nation on the October 16th report about the July 27th supposed test. All he said was that the U.S. will continue to watch China closely in its development of armament and advanced capabilities and systems that will only increase tensions in the region. China is a challenge, and we're going to remain focused on that. China denies testing hypersonic missiles, saying the test was a routine spacecraft experiment and implying it was for civilian purposes. Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian told a media briefing the following week that a routine test had been carried out in July to verify different types of reusable spacecraft technology. He said, "This was not a missile, this was a spacecraft. This is of great significance for reducing the cost of spacecraft use." Mr. Zhao added that many countries had carried out similar tests in the past. When asked if the Financial Times report had essentially been a fib without skipping a beat, he replied yes. But analysts say that if the report is correct, China has not only got a missile that can fly 5 times the speed of sound, but is more maneuverable than a standard ballistic missile. The most significant thing about the new weapon is that it could attack the US from an unexpected direction, such as the South Pole. The United States missile defenses and early warning radars are pointed towards the North Pole, as that is the standard route for intercontinental ballistic missiles, so the country will be vulnerable to a strike coming from the opposite direction. Because they're fast and can avoid detection, it can decrease the amount of warning time we have and the amount of decision time leaders have to respond to a crisis if hypersonic weapons are used, says Daryl Kimball, executive director of the Arms Control Association, regarding the new Chinese weapon. The idea that China might have fired a rocket into full orbit with this missile on it is disturbing to experts. We now have to start worrying about whether every Chinese satellite might not be a disguised nuclear warhead. This is a very destabilizing development, said Dean Cheng, a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. But regardless of whether this particular weapon is real or not, what is clear is that China has been investing heavily in shorter-range hypersonic missiles. This summer, it was reported that China had begun construction of more than 100 new silos for intercontinental ballistic missiles in China's western desert. What is very clear is that China is pushing to develop its nuclear capabilities, its strategic intercontinental capabilities, significantly beyond what has been the case for the last 4 or 5 decades. And China, according to US officials, has been more aggressive recently in investing in shorter-range hypersonic weapons. These skim through the upper atmosphere at more than 5 times the speed of sound and can also change direction during a flight. Those properties give China an important advantage against missile defenses, according to Tong Zhao, a senior fellow with the Carnegie Endowment in Beijing. Given the capability for these hypersonic missiles to maneuver during flight, and given their rather fast speed, they can better penetrate missile defense systems, he says. Zhao says that China sees the US missile defenses as a major threat as the country has been building up its stockpile of shorter-range hypersonic missiles, which can be armed with either a nuclear or a conventional warhead. If it was tested, this new longer-distance weapon fits into that pattern. He says that in the big picture, Chinese leadership wants to protect itself from what it sees as growing US aggression. China feels it needs greater overall military power, including a stronger nuclear power, to ensure that the US won't be able to interfere with Chinese internal matters. But not everyone agrees that China's buildup of hypersonic weapons is purely defensive. Michael Griffin, a former Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, says China's hypersonic arsenal allows it to expand its influence in the region. One could target airfields and aircraft carriers within 15 or 20 minutes of flight time, literally thousands of kilometers away from the Chinese mainland, and the new intercontinental hypersonic missile could take that capability a step further. With or without a nuclear warhead, such weapons could potentially strike US ships anywhere on Earth, and that is a really big deal, he says. Griffin says that the US needs to develop and stockpile hypersonic missiles of its own to counter the Chinese threat. I'm not one to mince words, it is an arms race, Griffin says, and critically, we didn't start it. However, James Acton, the co-director of the Nuclear Policy Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, questions whether the current race for hypersonic weapons makes sense. He notes that China has already a sizable medium-range ballistic missile force that is very capable. China's intercontinental ballistic missiles are already more than capable of overwhelming US defenses, and its ICBM force is growing. For Acton, the growing tensions and lack of dialogue between the US and China are far more concerning than whether China has developed a new weapon. This does not mean that America is not actively involved in the hypersonic missile race, trying to beat the likes of China and Russia. The country has decided to take a different approach to hypersonic missiles, opting to focus on fielding new and advanced capabilities rather than trying to beat the opposition to putting such weapons into service with their military. To date, America has several publicly disclosed and acknowledged hypersonic missile programs in development, though some of them are arguably the same systems under development for multiple services or deployment methodologies, including but not limited to the US Navy's Conventional Prompt Strike, the US Army's Long-Range Hypersonic Weapon, the US Air Force's AGM-183 Air-Launched Rapid Response Weapon, the U.S. Air Force's Hypersonic Attack Cruise Missile, U.S. Navy's Offensive Anti-Surface Warfare Increment 2, DARPA's Operational Fires, the Joint U.S.-Australia's Southern Cross Integrated Flight Research Experiment, U.S. Air Force's Project Mayhem, the U.S. Navy's Screaming Arrow, DARPA's Hypersonic Air-Breathing Weapon Concept, and the more ambiguous U.S. Army's Vintage Racer program. But these countries are not alone in the hypersonic munitions race. While the US, China, and Russia were working on theirs, Kim Jong-un's regime recently claimed that North Korea fired a hypersonic missile with a warhead that could detach and glide. What I'm concerned about in the future years is unconstrained ballistic missile and hypersonic missile races in East Asia, Daryl Kimball says of North Korea's announcement. We know there are military tensions between China and Japan, between the Koreas, and between the United States and China. Experts are increasingly concerned about North Korea's hypersonic missile test, asking questions like, where did North Korea get the technology? Analysts say they could have gotten it from China or Russia, but they also say China and Russia have expressed concern over North Korea having that capability. So the North Koreans could have developed that hypersonic capability on their own. What do you think about all the advanced weapons technology springing up in different countries? How long before one of these countries snaps and uses it on another? Let us know what you think by leaving a comment in the section below. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.